In the part 3 of the Trading Analytics project chapter, we are going to start by generating a loop which will create a returns and cumulative returns column using the calculation that we have seen in the introduction of this video, and in a second time create variables that we will use in order to plot our data. In this advanced level task, this loop will not be the easiest one. That will be a little bit tricky in terms of techniques, but we are going to go step by step on how we are going to create this loop. First of all, we are going to set up two different lists. The first one is a list of data frames, and the second one is a list of tickers. You can do it by using only one, because as you can see, the tickers are the same as the first four letters of the data frames, but that will make it too much complex. That's why we are starting by setting up the data frame and the tickers in two different lists. Okay, the first argument that we are going to call is the length that we'll use for our loop. We are going to go from I to length, and the length will be defined by the length of the list, the number of arguments that we have. Then, in the second time, we are setting I equals 0 in order to have the beginning of our loop. And right now we have the beginning and the end of our loop. And we are going to do as well as at the end of the loop, I equal I plus 1 by this way. It's similar to what we have done in the first part of this Trading Analytics project, when we have set up that y plus equal 1 represent the same as all y equal 1 plus 1. It's exactly the same. Okay, and before to start the loop, the first thing that we are going to do, we are going to create kind of checkpoints. The checkpoint will say, okay, the data frame 0 is calculating the daily return, in order to be able to follow how many data frames have been set up and for how many data frames did we create this column. That's very easy. It's just by printing data frame plus the string I, which means like the argument number that we have here, like 0, 1, 2, and 3. Plus is calculating the daily return. That's what we are going to do next. So just a quick checkpoint, that doesn't matter about the calculation. This line is not necessary, but that's good to have mainly if you want to, let's say you want to compare 100 different shares. That's good to be able to follow that the loop is doing a good job and that nothing has been missed. Once you have done that, we are going to develop our calculation. If you remember well, in order to get the percentage daily return is 1 plus df closing price dot pct change 1. Here what we are going to do, it's exactly that, which means like df list y, which means that's going to be Twitter data, for instance. Twitter data returns will be equal to Twitter data close dot percentage change 1. Okay, once you have your daily return, what you are going to do is to get your cumulative return, which means here we are going to apply the same formula, which here is like df list y equal 1 plus df list y returns dot comprod. It's the calculation that we have seen just right here. And yeah, as you can see here, that's similar, like you have your data frame. That's why we have it in list, which means that after each iteration, that's gonna change. In the first round, when I gonna be equal to 0. That will take Twitter data, which means Twitter data returns equal to Twitter data close dot percentage change 1. Once this column has been created, that's going to create a second column. Again, Twitter data cumulative return column will equal to 1 plus Twitter data blah blah, blah returns column dot comprod. And in a second time, when that's going to be all set, we are going to set up this variable into different variables. Basically, what we are going to do here, we are just automating this part, which means like Twitter data returns column, it's equal to variable which is called Twitter returns, and Twitter data cumulative return will be equal to a variable which is called Twitter cum returns. That's what we are doing here. Again, we just setting a quick sentence in order to be able to follow what's happening. Here, Twitter is setting returns and cumulative returns variable. It's not mandatory. That has nothing in terms of impact of the loop. You can remove it. That's gonna run without any issues. But just to be able to follow what's happening, you can set up the name of the ticker, which is setting cumulative and returns variables. In order to do so, that's exactly what we have done in the part 1, which means using this function, which is local string tickers and returns, in order to create a local variable, which will be equal to dflist returns. It's exactly what we are doing here. If you look at it in the beginner part, for the beginner pass, we are required to do that, which means like taking the name of the column and setting it in a variable, and that's what we are doing here, which means here we have the name of the data frame, column returns, into this variable, and if you go up, as you can see, that's exactly the same. And if you run that, you must find out these results, which means that, for instance, if you look at Netflix data, after one day, after the day 1, Netflix took 1.9% profits. After the day 2, Netflix took 0.3%, etc., etc. And for instance, if you took at Uber data tail, you must find out this result once you executed this loop. Okay, now let's continue with the plotting. Once you have this new column, we are going to plot right now these columns into different plots. The first one is to plot the cumulative returns in order to compare this graph with what happens right here. Here we have the evolution of the stock price. We have said that is not relevant. And here what we are going to do is to plot, instead of plotting the share price, we are going to plot the cumulative return that you are going to make with these shares, in order to find out what is most interesting to invest in. Okay, in order to do so, as usual, we are going to set up figure equal code.figure. It's our entry, and in order to show, and in order to show, we are going to finish our query by asking plotly to show. And in between, we are going to start by adding the traces, which means here we have 4 different traces to add. We have to add Twitter. We have to add on x-axis. The x-axis will be the same. Yeah, small mistake here. Here that will be the snap. I'm going to substitute that and correct it. Yeah, here that will be Twitter data index, TWTR data index. Here that will be Netflix data index, and here Snap data index. On the y-axis, that will represent the Twitter, Netflix, Snap, and Uber cumulative returns, as you can see here. And in order to have the name on the right side, we are going to define name equal, and that will generate automatically this information on the right side. Once you added your trust, you will have, if you execute this one, you will have just this trust and this information on the right side. You will not have a range slider here, and you will have neither the cumulative returns and date information on the y and x axis. That's why here what we are going to do, we are going to update x and y axis by this way. Up. Let's plot it, and yeah, and if you execute that, you will find out you will have the same result. You will have the details of how much money you must have made if you invest in Uber, Snapchat, Twitter, or Netflix. As you can see here, if you invest on Uber, that you must have lost money over the time. DeepSight, since the coronavirus beginning of the crisis, Uber is doing great, but the main shares which taking the most advantage of the coronavirus are Snapchat and Netflix. You can see that visually. If you go on Netflix, you can see that you would have made around 75% profit in terms of returns since the beginning of since the lowest price after the coronavirus crisis. And for Snapchat, that's a result which is kind of similar, whilst Uber and Twitter are just going up very slowly. And if you look at Snapchat, that was making you lose more money than Twitter before the coronavirus, and since the COVID-19 crisis, now they are like fighting to be in terms of return on investment. Okay, once you plot this first graph, we are going to plot the second graph, which is a little bit more technical. In this graph, we are going to compare the volume and the share price to check the impacts that the volume traded has on the performance of the shares. Okay, in order to do so, similarly to what we have done here, we are going to start by declaring the figure. Ctrl V. And at the end, you will have to show the figure. And here in this graph is a mix between a scatter plot and a histogram. That's why and a bar chart or a histogram. That's why we are going to add two traces. The first one is a scatter plot, and the second one is a bar chart on which we divide the volume price by 20 million. You can divide it by 40 million, by 200 million. If you divide it, for instance, by 200 million, the result will be included between 0 and 1. If you want to have a bigger scale, you can do as well. But yeah, in this case particularly, we divided by 20 million. Okay, and we are going to update the X and Y axis similarly to get the data here on the X and Y axis, plus adding a run slider. And similarly to what we have done, we are going to do that. Similarly, fig update x-axis, title dates, run slider equal true. Fig update y-axis, title equal runs price in USD. And you get your x and y axis. Yeah, that's all for the part 3. And right now at the end of the part 3, I gave you a small challenge that you will have to solve. This challenge is, first of all, after answering the question, if you find out any correlation between the volume and the price. As you can see, it's quite obvious that the share price evolution or the volatility gonna depend of the volume traded, which means for instance, if you want to make a lot of money faster, you must choose some company on which the volume traded is high, because you will have big impact, a massive impact on your share price evolution. If you see, if you check out, for instance, on the February 7, we had 11.6 times 20 millions, which means 23.2 million. 230 million USD, which have been traded on Snapchat. And if you look at the news, you will find out that Snapchat raised good news this day, and that's why the volume trade have been so high. Okay, yeah, and yeah, as you can see, I believe that everyone can notice a massive correlation between the volume traded and the share price. Again, here, one of the major loss for Snapchat occurs on the 1st of May, and this day represents one of the massive days in terms of volume traded for the shares. So the answer must be, it's not a closed answer, that can be quite open, and yeah, but you can find out different correlation, visual correlation between the volume traded and the share price. And to conclude this video, we are going just to go over the extra task that I gave you, which was to compare the volatility for Netflix and Uber visually by creating a plot. I never went through Plotly Figure Factory, but that's gonna depend about some independent research that you're gonna have to do. In order to do so, that's quite easy. I give you the name of the application, which is Plotly Figure Factory. What you have to do, just go on Google and type Plotly Figure Factory histogram sample, and you will get, just click on the first link. Yeah, and you will get different example of what you can do with Plotly Figure Factory. For instance, we can use this one, something similar to this one, and if you look at the structure, we have first of all add histogram data, group data together, and then create a disk plot. Here I gave you which histogram data we want to add. It's Netflix return, and I added a field NA because if you look at the data sets, if you look at the first value, that's NA value. That's why I added fill NA in order to fill it by a value of 0. If you want to fill NA by 1, you can just type .fill NA 1. That's gonna change all the NA value by 1. That's the histogram data. The second part is setting this data into a variable that you are going to call isData, and as well as if you want your group label, you can set it in a second variable that you are going to call group label in order to have it here in the right side. That's what we are going to do here. We are going to set up our histogram data by x1 and x2, and our group labels by Netflix and Uber, because x1 represents Netflix and x2 represents Uber. Once you have achieved that, we are going to create a displot with custom bin size. It's what they not signify here. Up, copy, paste, and the only difference gonna be on the bin size. As I told you, I want 1%, a bin size of 1%. And if you execute, you will find out this result, this table. And when you look at this graph, the first thing that you can see is the fact that Uber is much more volatile than Netflix, which means if you want to trade with safety, you must trade with Netflix. Otherwise, if you want to be more aggressive in your trading, Uber can be a good solution. Second point that you can see here, you can see that Uber is more skewed to the left, which means on average Uber will make less money and will be more risky, whilst Netflix is more skewed to the right. It's not very obvious like that. I believe if you take a smaller bin size, you can even see it better. But yeah, if you look at it right here, you can see that there is a small difference. There is a small difference in terms of average, but that makes sense because if you look at this graph, you can see that Netflix brings much more money than Uber. That's why that Netflix is more skewed to the right than Uber. But in terms of volatility, Uber is much more risky company. You can also find out some outliers. For Uber, for instance, you got an outlier of one day, this company lost 21.3%. And one day where Uber got 38%. Okay, that's all for this solution part 3. And see you in the next step where we are going to implement some algorithm. That will be the first introduction of algorithm for our trading analytics project. See you!